This is Dr. Katie from ScribeNote, and welcome to our next episode of What's Up, Doc. Today I have Dr. Marie Holowaychuk with me, and she will be covering a whole bunch of really important topics in the veterinary industry. She is the founder of Reviving VetMed, and I think we'll start there. Can you tell us a bit about that, Marie?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Katie. So Reviving VetMed came about from a desire that I had to share resources when it comes to mental health and well-being for veterinary professionals. So in around 2015, 2016, I had started a bit of my own personal journey and deep dive into burnout prevention, mental wellness, self-care, boundaries, and all those sorts of things. And I had been writing blogs on those topics for a while and speaking on some of those topics at conferences. But I wanted to get that information out to a wider audience. And so rather than having all of those resources and things on my personal website, I created this website that was meant to be a resource hub for anybody in the profession that was looking for blogs, podcast episodes, downloads, and things like that. And so that was built a few years ago now. And then it was last year that we started expanding those resources. So we started inviting guest bloggers to contribute. I have also started interviewing people on the podcast. So you and I had an interview not too long ago. And Reviving VetMed is also going to be offering other services this year as well. So we have coaches on the platform for everything ranging from ADHD support to menopause support, and resilience training and those sorts of things, to also lunch and learns and critical incident group debriefings and webinars and lots of things, anything that you're looking for related to mental health and wellness specific to our profession is going to be on that hub.
Well, I love that. That is amazing. I think it's a critical thing for the industry that, we're seeing become more prevalent, I guess, in the last little bit, especially. I feel like personally, some of the struggles in the industry were kind of exacerbated by the pandemic. And, we know that there's a pretty intense shortage. And I think that probably factors in. Can you maybe speak to any of the changes in the industry that you have seen, any of the shifts for the better or worse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such a great question. And I think your observations are correct. It appears as though we were reaching a tipping point before the pandemic, and then the pandemic just really pushed veterinary clinics and practices and professionals over the edge, so to speak, in that, we were already on the brink of not really having enough staff and veterinarians to meet the need. And then, of course, everything changed during COVID, and we had to quickly adjust and go curbside and utilize more technologies to facilitate, virtual appointments and telehealth and all of these other things. And I think everyone was impacted by the pandemic from a mental health perspective, certainly globally, especially when we look at care providers in human healthcare. There was much higher rates of burnout and psychological distress at work. When we look at the veterinary research studies, interestingly, rates of psychological stress did go up with the pandemic, and burnout rates stayed relatively the same. So what I think that says is that, yeah, we were kind of already there before, and then it's just really persisted. And maybe things are better now. I don't know. It depends on who you talk to and where you practice and how well staffed you are. But there certainly is still great concern for burnout. And, in terms of how things have changed for the better, I would certainly say that we're talking about it a lot more. When I started talking about these topics back in, like I said, about 10 years ago in 2014, 2015, nobody was talking about it. There was a little bit of information on compassion fatigue and so on, but burnout wasn't really a hot topic. Nobody really knew the definitions. There wasn't really space for it at the conferences. I had a lot of conferences and organizations turn me down for speaking because they genuinely thought there wasn't going to be an interest. And then fast forward to today, and we have conferences that have entire streams dedicated to wellness and organizations that are, you know, putting thousands of dollars really aside for wellness initiatives, and even smaller practices and organizations that are really looking thoughtfully at the benefits that they're offering their team members and, the wellness supports that they're bringing to the table. So I'm really happy to see this. I think there's been a societal shift in this direction where we're openly talking about mental health and wellness more. And I think it's really, really important that we're seeing this in vet medicine as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a complex career, isn't it? It's
Mhm.
one that you can't even really describe to someone, the challenges that you face on the day to day. Like, as much as it can be very rewarding, it can be really draining too, just putting a ton of effort and energy into your appointments and into your client communications. And then, we're obviously practicing medicine as well. So there's going to be those cases that don't have good outcomes and potentially people that are more upset about that and maybe placing blame, and it can be really difficult to navigate, I think. And I'm sure we've always had these pressures, but like you said, now they're just being spoken about more, which I think, normalizes it. Like
Mhm.
people don't have to feel ashamed that they're, exhausted and, feeling overwhelmed, because it's normal with like just all of the multifaceted things that we face.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm really happy about it too.
Mhm.
What else do you think that we could do in the industry to maybe help reduce burnout? Obviously this is a rose-colored glasses kind of
Mhm.
question. Yeah, any areas where you see change being impactful?
Yeah, well, I think it takes looking at what are the root causes of burnout, right? And burnout is one of those really complex, multifaceted consequences of a lot of different contributing factors, right? So by definition, burnout is the result of chronic workplace related stress that goes unmanaged for some period of time. And so that stress can come from working in a toxic environment. That's been documented in vet medicine to be a contributor. It can come from an excessive workload. It can come from not having control over the work a person is doing, feeling underappreciated or not rewarded at work, feeling like a person isn't advancing in their role, like their role is becoming very mundane and boring, can also create burnout. So there's a lot of different contributing factors, and there's a lot of different ways that people can present with signs of burnout. So we typically think of three symptoms, right? We think of one symptom being emotional exhaustion, right? Think about if you have an exhaustive workload, you're just working your buns off, feeling like you're not getting recognized for how hard you're working. That's going to deplete you of your emotional capacity to do your job. And as you mentioned, there are a ton of emotional demands on us in our work in veterinary practice. And so there's also a symptom of cynicism where we start to have a little bit of distance or separation from the people and the animals that we're caring for. So we just don't care as much. We're a little bit like cynical, a little bit disillusioned or distanced from our colleagues when we experience those symptoms. And then last but not least, we can experience this low sense of personal accomplishment or professional efficacy, meaning maybe we're working really hard, but we feel like it doesn't matter or it's not making a difference. No matter how hard we work, we can't seem to make a difference. And so you can imagine that depending on what a person is experiencing and what the underlying root causes are, there's many, many different solutions, I should say, out there. And so I think of this as a shared responsibility. There is certainly a responsibility on us as individuals to, set boundaries and recognize our limits and manage ourselves. I know I have full on been the cause of my own burnout throughout my career. Not every time, but certainly sometimes where I take on too many shifts, or I don't say no when I really want to, or I take my work home with me, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
There's also times where the cause is outside of me. It's systemic, right? It's just a function of being in an industry that demands so much of us, or it's a function of working in a workplace where people aren't held accountable for their bad behaviors and toxicity persists, or the schedule is overly demanding and really unrealistic in terms of getting a person's medical records done and getting all the things that they need to get done so that they can get home at the end of the day and have a life outside of work and avoid that burnout. So, it's a big question. And I guess I'll just say that individuals need to think about what they can do to help manage their workload and, stay within their limits in terms of what they can handle. And veterinary organizations and practices also need to support their team members and not ask too much of them. Promote healthy and safe work environments, promote good communication and conflict resolution, give opportunities for advancement, make sure people are resourced, they've got enough staff, they've got enough equipment, they've got working computers with a good internet connection, all of the things that we take for granted until they're not working. And then it can really drive us into a state of burnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very true. Very good points. I think, the biggest thing that resonated with me there is like the difficulty in saying no. Like it is such a struggle, even still, where they're trying to fit something in that, really should be seen, but you're already so full and, managing that, if you're short staffed, it just becomes, you're right, like this additional kind of load that if you're already in a place where you're not handling things well, it can become super challenging. So I think those are all really good points. And I think if anybody is struggling with that, they should definitely check out your website, look at the coaching. Like the last speaker I spoke with as well spoke about like life coaching and how impactful it is on just not even just work, because obviously work is a huge part of our lives, but shouldn't be the only thing defining our lives, right? So I think it's a really good idea for people to get more open and thoughtful about those things. So obviously you've had an immense amount of experience in many different parts of the veterinary industry. I first met you when I was in first year vet school, and you were teaching and practicing at the Ontario Vet College. Do you want to take us through a bit about your career and the changes you've experienced?
Yeah, it's been quite a trajectory for sure. Not really where I expected I would be when I first got into vet school, how many years ago. So I graduated way back in 2004 from the Western College of Vet Medicine in Saskatchewan. And I had grown up in Edmonton. So I had grown up, in the western part of Canada. And I grew up with two veterinarian parents. So my mom owned a small animal practice outside of Edmonton, and my dad worked in regulatory medicine for the government. And I always thought, I'm going to go to vet school and then I'm going to come back to my mom's practice and I'm going to work there for the rest of my life. It's going to stay in the family. And I got into vet school, and, my whole life I had been in my mom's practice, and I didn't realize how vast vet medicine was. Like I knew my dad was a vet, but he didn't work at my mom's practice. But I don't think I recognized how many opportunities there were. And I very quickly became fascinated with specialization. And so I opted to do an internship after school. So I went to Washington State. I did a rotating small animal medicine and surgery internship. And it was there I really fell in love with emergency and critical care. And so I toyed with the idea of going back home. And then I decided, no, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do a residency. And so I moved to North Carolina, and I was at NC State for 3 years, finishing my residency. Loved it. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done and also like the most rewarding. I still consider my NC State family like a second family to me. Just some really great years in my life and really formed who I am today as a clinician. And so after that, yeah, I took the job at the Ontario Vet College. Moved back to Canada, and I was so excited to be in academia. I love teaching. I love doing research. I loved the variability of it. You would have a couple of weeks in the clinic, and then you would have a couple of weeks to focus on your teaching and your grad students and your research programs. And it was great until it wasn't great. And I got really burned out. And honestly, I think that was a function of loving my work so much and not recognizing my limits and not recognizing the importance of taking care of myself and not not having those boundaries. I mean, I was constantly working. I was on call 50% of the time. And when I was on call, I would just be at work because I was like, well, I may as well be working if I'm on call. And I just never I wasn't proactive in really taking care of myself and my mental health. And then I started to just see all of these signs in my mental health and physical health that were concerning. And I still didn't know that it was burnout. I just thought, oh, I'm not cut out for this job. I'm not going to make it in academia. And I ended up resigning right before, actually, I had already applied for tenure and I resigned. I thought this isn't sustainable for me. Part of it was homesickness. I really wanted to be back in Western Canada. And part of it was just not recognizing what I probably needed was a break and then to come back with some skills and strategies to better take care of myself. Everything happens for a reason. So I moved out west. That was, more than 10 years ago now. And I basically just started work as an independent contractor. I would locum around Canada and the US as a criticalist and ER doctor. I would still go to different vet schools and help with teaching. I created, a vet tech training program. And I got very heavy into the world of mental health and wellness. So I attended a lot of human conferences, took some certifications, got my yoga teacher training, my meditation teacher training, my coaching certification, and boom, everything just sort of has happened organically in terms of recognizing my passion for wanting to really share with others in our profession what has helped me so much over the years, strategies I still continue to use, because trust me, I do not have this all figured out. I still hit waves of burnout or have difficulty saying no and, have to recalibrate myself. But I just have really found a space that I feel so passionately about and is so needed in our profession. I love our profession. I love that I'm carrying on a lineage that started with my parents and, that I just can contribute to future generations of veterinarians, hopefully in giving them the skills and strategies that will help them stay in this profession for a long, long time. Because I mean, the work we do is so important on so many levels. And most of us went into this work because we love it and we'd really like to keep doing it for a long time. And I want to help that.
That's amazing. Super inspiring. I honestly, thank you very much for sharing, obviously, very personal story. And I think, the work that you're doing is so much more, like it can resonate so much more because you've experienced it, right? I think that's so incredible. And honestly, what you said, like the I'm not cut out for this profession, I could guess that probably everybody who's graduated has thought that at one time or another, that imposter syndrome, that, I'm not good enough. How am I going to do this for my entire life? That like, that exhaustion that we've talked about. It's really hard. And I'm sorry that obviously you experienced it, but, like you said, everything happens for a reason, and just being open to like working on yourself and open to the trajectory that the career potentially can take you in, I think is a big thing for people to remember to do. And I'm really happy that you joined me today to talk about that, because I think more people need to hear it. Like, not one more vet is a strong foundation. And, we there's so much pressure on veterinarians because more and more animals are becoming like family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just all of those factors. And I think people should really consider listening to you and using all the resources that you have, and maybe any others that they potentially think might be useful to them. But just remember the profession is so incredible, and like you went to school for so long to do this. And it's always so sad when people are like, oh, I'm leaving the industry, or, I don't think I can do this anymore. Just remember there's so many different things that you could potentially do, so many people you could reach out to, and try and stick it out, in a different aspect, right? If
Mm-hmm.
that's if you don't want to give up completely, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, super inspiring. It was really, really nice to talk to you today. Um, I guess let's close off with maybe a couple tips that you have for people who are experiencing burnout currently at their practice, like maybe how to kind of be brave enough to speak to your superiors or teammates about that, and open up that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such a great question. I think first things first, one of the great shifts that we've seen in our profession over the last 10 years has been a much richer resource of mental health supports.
Mhm.
So nearly every individual in our industry, whether they are a support team member, a technician or nurse, or a veterinarian, they will have some sort of support from their provincial or state veterinary medical association in terms of mental health support. So I first and foremost, and I say this because there is so much overlap between burnout and mental health challenges like depression and anxiety. You want to speak to an expert who can really help you suss out what is going on here, right? Is this a work-related situation where we need to identify some changes that could help you to recover from your burnout? Or is there something deeper going on here? And so always starting there, making sure first and foremost that your mental health is taken care of, because it's as important as your physical health. We all recognize, oh, if I break my hand, I can't practice as a vet. Well, if your brain isn't working as at its full capacity, you're not going to be able to practice as a vet either. So while it's an invisible disability, so to speak, we do want to take care of our mental health. So take advantage of your employee assistance program, whatever resources your veterinary medical association provides, and or your practice resources. There's a large number of practices that offer mental health coverage, either privately or through an employee assistance program. So that would be my first step. And from there, you probably will get some sort of a clue about where it is that you need support. And that's where it could be as simple as, like you said, Katie, having a conversation with your practice manager or owner. Maybe there's an adjustment in your schedule that would be helpful. Is it constantly working weekends that is challenging for you? Could we find a way to have more weekend sharing within the practice associates? Is it your medical record burden that is really bringing you down? Could we find a way to utilize technologies, like ScribeNote and other technologies to help streamline that process? Really trying to identify, not just vaguely, like, this isn't sustainable, I can't keep doing this, which is kind of where I threw up my hands, but more intentionally and specifically at where am I really getting stuck? What is really causing me unhappiness? Where am I not feeling joy? Where am I feeling completely depleted and exhausted? For some people, that might be certain client experiences. And so maybe there is a particular clientele that you want to shift towards, or that we limit certain appointments that are particularly draining for you. For some people, it really is. They love dentistry, for example, and it's like, that's where my passion is. Great. How do we put you in a role where you get to do more of that and less of the stuff that kind of drags you down? And then I would also say, of course, that coaching can be a tremendous resource. So I speak, for my colleagues that I know who live with ADHD, for example, and feel very challenged in their day to organize themselves and keep on top of their records and prioritize tasks and delegate and these sorts of things. Having a coach that can help you with those executive functioning tasks can be transformative for really streamlining your day and helping you to feel less bogged down in some of the clerical work, so to speak, that we have to do as veterinary professionals. So there's great supports out there, many different types of coaches that can also help with career transitions, helping you with communication when it comes to setting boundaries. Again, we're so fortunate in our space to have so many more resources than we've ever had before. So I think those would be the starting points that I would suggest.
Amazing. Yeah, I agree. I think those sound like great places to start. And I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge with us and with everybody else who's listening. So I just want to say thank you again so much from us in the Scribe Note team for joining us on What's Up Doc today. And we'll catch everybody on the next episode. Thanks so much, Marie.
Thanks, Katie. It's been a pleasure.